The sea is an unforgiving mistress. Even the most modern and well-built ships can be taken by her in an instant. Sometimes, however, it seems she simply forgets about them and returns them to land, albeit with a creepy twist. Here are some of the scariest ghost vessels that return from hell. Our first story involves the Mary Celeste. On December 1872, the ship departed New York for Genoa, Italy. The cargo was a standard one for the time period: oranges, wine, and lemons. There were 33 barrels of alcohol, 297 boxes of oranges, and 140 boxes of lemons. Everything was fine until 2 weeks later, when the ship was sighted off the Azores Islands. The crew of the ship signaled to them that all was well. However, 2 days later, the captain of the nearby ship noticed something strange. He looked over and realized that there was no one on the deck of the Mary Celeste, and no one was at the helm. He tried signaling to the ship, but there was no response. No one was seen on board. It wasn't until a few hours later that someone was spotted on the ship. It was the ship's cook, and he appeared as if he had been rowing the boat with his bare hands. When asked what had happened, he replied, "We have lost our captain and the rest of the crew. I don't know what has become of them." Then he began to cry uncontrollably. A search party was sent out to find the missing sailors, but their bodies were never found. The ship was then taken to the nearest port. As the story goes, a bottle of Captain Briggs's sperm was taken from the ship before it left, and it was said that any man who drank from it would not only have bad luck, but would also die within a year. But this tale pales in comparison to the one involving the ghost ship, the Octavius. In 1982, Soviet and Norwegian ships reported seeing a vessel floating off the coast of Greenland. This was odd, since there should not have been any ships in the area. In fact, this was a well-documented area, since it was part of an international race between the Soviets and Norwegians to chart the uncharted parts of the ocean. Both ships assumed it was a mirage and continued on their way. However, when they arrived at their destination, the ship was still there. When they boarded the ship, they soon realized that it was a full-fledged ghost ship. The ship had no crew on board, and no one had been there for a very long time. Upon further inspection, they realized that the ship had been frozen in ice for many years, possibly decades. The men had died and become mummies aboard the ship. What is even more amazing is that the ship was from 1862. It was almost 20 years old, and yet it had just popped up out of nowhere. To this day, no one knows how long the ship was iced or where it came from. The Carola Deering is another great example of a ghost ship. This American schooner was sailing from Puerto Rico to Newport News, Virginia. The ship had a full crew of 8 men. One day a storm arose, and the men realized that their ship could not compete with the ferocity of the waters. They dropped anchor so that the ship wouldn't be pushed out to sea. However, when the other ships in the area awoke, they found that the Carola Deering had disappeared. It was as if the ship and its crew had vanished into thin air. One day the Coast Guard received a message from a lookout on a nearby island. He claimed that he saw a ship matching the description of the Carola Deering, but there was no crew on board. This was odd, but it wasn't unheard of. The Coast Guard set out to investigate. They found the ship completely deserted, and there was no sign of the crew anywhere. They did, however, notice that the lifeboats were missing from the ship, which meant only one thing: the crew had abandoned ship, but there was absolutely no reason for them to do so. The ship was in good condition, and there was no immediate danger. The only thing the Coast Guard could think of was that the men had been taken by pirates. But why would pirates leave the ship? They must have realized that there was no hope of rescue, and they were better off trying to make it on their own. In 2000, a British cargo ship was traveling through the Suez Canal, when suddenly it ran into some fog. The captain slowed the ship down and proceeded through the canal slowly. He didn't want to risk hitting another ship since visibility was low. Suddenly, they heard a loud bang and the ship's alarms went off. They had hit something, but they didn't know what. They turned on all of the lights and soon realized that they had hit a barge. The barge had no lights on and no one was on board. The captain immediately contacted the authorities and told them what had happened. The authorities dispatched a helicopter and a search boat to the scene. They found the barge and soon realized that it was occupied. However, there was no one on board. It appeared as if the people who were on the ship had fled in terror of their lives. But why? To this day, no one knows what happened to the barge or its crew. If you enjoyed this video and want to see another just like it, be sure to check out more content. With that, thanks for watching, and be sure to tune in next time.